Adventure is in my blood. Finding treasures big or small and having fun is what it's all about. With my wife Melissa and our 3 kids, life is pretty full. But there isn't a mountain we can't climb together. This isn't your ordinary antique store. My name is Alex Archbold and this is Curiosity Inc. Hi everyone. About a week ago or so, you might remember that I found a very special book. Today I'm on my way to go meet Mr. Barry Bailey, who's a book specialist, have a look at the book, get his thoughts and opinions, and hopefully verify that it is indeed authentic. It's a very special item. It's got a lot of history to it and you won't want to miss it. Barry Bailey, who's right behind me, he's got his professional book binding smock on. We're gonna have a look at this book right here, which is a 1700s account of a Mr. Spratt, and we'll come inside and have a look-see.
So welcome to the shop.
Yeah, thanks.
I've been in this location 18 years. I've been collecting books since I was a little boy, and but recently just got into the bookbinding part of it, but always been a book hound.
Wonderful. Well, let's head inside and see what we can learn about this book.
Let's see. Come on in.
All right. People always love the aesthetic of the old book presses too, but they serve a function. So why don't you tell us what the function of a book press is?
Well, it's I use it for a few different purposes, but primarily it's when you've bound your book and you're pressing sheets or the finished book. You want to put it in, put a little bit of pressure on there, make sure all the glue, everything holds. If you're building a book from scratch and you've made signatures, you need to press those so the spine edges are nice and crisp and fine, so when you sew them, they're all right where you want them to be.
So they're not just a beautiful item to look at, they're practical too.
Absolutely, especially if you're a bookbinder.
You've got sat irons, you've got presses. Some might say that the bookbinding business is both sad and depressing.
Oh, stop!
I'm just kidding. He's the happiest bookseller I've ever met. So I have to ask, now I reached out to a bookseller in New York who deals in antique books, and I said, what's the best way to handle an old book? And he told me just with your clean, bare hands. Yeah. Is that right? Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
The white glove thing is a bit of a urban myth, if you will. There are instances where you definitely want to use the white gloves, but just as a rule of thumb, no.
Yeah, it's funny. He told me that the problem with white gloves is that you can't feel the page, and oftentimes you'll rip your page or damage the book by using. So he said, just make sure your hands are clean. So for all those people watching at home, we'll be handling this book today with bare hands. Yeah. And that is, in most cases, and this is the second book person that's told me this, that's okay to do. So let's have a look-see. So I guess to start, I've marked off some pretty interesting pages in here, like the 7 Years' War, the American Revolution. There's a letter to George Washington. Wow. There's some neat stuff. Now, I have noticed that some of the things in here are recorded in other history logs, but he was there at the time, at least I believe he was. So I guess first impressions of the cover, what can you tell us about the outside of the book before we go into the end?
Well, we know it's from 17...
Well, that's what it's dated, but if you didn't know that, what would you think looking at the way it's put together?
Oh, absolutely. I would think this is a book from the 1700s. And you can tell, I mean, it's, I'm not even sure. We'd have to look closer at that. Yeah, and that's not unusual with books this age, is that they've had repairs done over the years.
Now, do you think this would have been bound himself, like he would have put this together?
I suppose it's possible, but...
Because it's a memoir, right? So, I mean, either he bought a blank book and started writing in it, or he made this thing himself.
Well, see, now, it's a journal for all intents and purposes.
It is, yeah.
So these were
manuscript or journal, yeah.
Blank pages, right?
Yeah.
So when I look at a book this age, and I'm trying to authenticate it, and I should say, I'm not a conservator, I'm not an expert on those sorts of things.
But you know stuff.
I do.
I know a little stuff. Between the two of us, we'll make one person that can figure this out.
Yeah, I mean, because most of the books in my shop are, from the 1800s and up. And I have a couple in the 1700s, but I look for the paper. What kind of paper, and is it true to the time period? And this absolutely, I would say, in my opinion, does. It's also got some foxing, which is they used acidic paper back then, and it reacts with the air, and it creates those little brown splotches that you often see in older books.
Right. Okay. So if it didn't have that, you might be concerned.
Absolutely.
Now, their S's also looked like lowercase f's back then too.
Yes.
So I guess you're looking to see, are they using the script, the fonts from that time too?
Absolutely. Yeah. And my goodness, he had neat handwriting, did he not? Look
Yeah,
at
he
that.
did. Yeah, it's really nicely written. There's spots that are a little bit more, you know,
Tougher than others.
yeah. And I feel like he was writing this to really record important parts of history from his time, or not really his perspective even. Mind you, there's some poetry and some personal things that he's putting in there too. And it's written from, let's see.
There's 1803.
So the reason I mark this one is that this is the 1803 rebellion in Ireland. And so he says that a number of rebels hanged in Dublin for the late rebellion, for their rebellious acts.
Yeah.
Robert Emmet. Now, Robert Emmet is very well known in Irish history as being, he was the commander-in-chief, and he gave what they called the speech from the dock, where they said, you know, what does they usually do, any last words, and then he basically went on this whole thing about how, you know, actually, it's all right there.
He gave his whole speech as his last word.
Yeah. So he recorded, so it says, you know, being asked in the usual manner what he had to say to the court, and then he records Robert Emmet's last words. Now, this is known, but I feel as though he was either there, as this person lived in Ireland, very near to Dublin. If he wasn't there to record this, then he may have seen it written in the paper the next day and recorded it himself.
And he was a fairly prominent gentleman in the community, so he most likely was there, I would think.
Okay, so what I know about Harlan Spratt is that his dad was Devereux Spratt. So they had some royal blood, and he kind of talks about his family tree a little bit in the beginning. But they were fairly wealthy landowners. And at this time, in the 17 and early 1800s, they had 850 acres. And that's a lot at the time in Ireland. I mean, what's Ireland? Only 900 acres? It's small. I'm kidding. Ireland's not really big, but 850 acres. And they had this sprawling manor that he built called Pencil Hill. Right. And it still is there, and I can't get a good picture of it, but from Google Earth, I found a shot of it, and it's quite a big manor property. But there's no pictures that I can find online of that building. But he was probably a nobleman. I believe that he might have been part of the Irish House of Lords at the time. So he was somebody who was educated, somebody who was privy to a lot of information. And I think as we go through, we'll see that he either knew or had access to Lord Nelson at the Battle of Trafalgar. There's all sorts of great stuff in this book.
Yeah.
There's no back and front to this. It's a which way book. So
look at that.
Yeah. So there's a newspaper clipping from 1799.
Oh my.
But when he started this side of the book, you can see it says, if we lift that flap a little bit, you'll see it says Pencil Hill, March 25th, 1786. And so at this time, he's starting to journal on this side of the book. And this is where he talks about his lineage to Robert Devereux and how they were married and how it goes back to King Edward III.
Oh, yes.
So he talks a little bit about that. Now, for the most part, you can see that horses obviously played a big role in culture back then. As, you know, I guess if this was a modern book, there'd be pictures of hot rods and stuff in it. But there's, you know, cures for the flu or colds. There's, you know, cures for diseases that horses have. There's recipes, hopefully not for horses. That would be gross. Yeah. If you can't cure your horse with this, here's a recipe to make great horse stew.
No, please.
No. So, and yeah, Pencil Hills is still a real place, but you can see, so there's bitter steel wine. So there's a recipe for this wine. And I guess these are all things that if you're traveling or on a ship or something, you might want to have, you know, cures for ailments, how to fix your horse, all that kind of stuff would be important to have with you. So I think he was doing some travel, and so you can see the journal entries of this time are a little bit more like they're not as linear. He was maybe going a little bit fast.
Yeah. And again, towards properly dating the book, I mean, you look for the type of ink and the type of instrument that was used. I mean, clearly this is a
quill.
A quill. And
yeah, you can see where it's darker. Like when he starts, he probably had dipped his quill when he started and then it starts to fade.
Yeah. And the type of ink that's used. I mean, if this was a Shakespeare First Folio, you would be taking samples of the ink, samples of the paper, and submitting them to a scientific.
But you're right, though, and I don't know if, you can kind of see it's darker, so he probably dipped it, and it starts off dark and strong.
Yep.
And then it starts getting lighter, and then you can see he has to dip it again. And
it almost runs out here.
Yeah, and then he dips it, and you can see that'll be...
Yeah.
Yeah, so, that's true. I hadn't really thought too much about that. And that's the interesting thing about a book that is inked rather than printed.
Yes. So interesting that it runs both ways. There's not a front or a back. Look on this page. Here we are. We're upside down.
We're upside down. So at some point... he starts here and then it flips around and it goes. That's about as late as an entry as there is, around 1811 or so.
Right, and I love the fact that he added the color and the lines.
Oh, there's some really nice drawings in here.
He decorated this all himself.
Yeah,
right?
He did. War Renewed, yeah.
And he's got
House of Commons meetings clippings that he thought were pertinent.
1803.
Yeah, but we go back a little bit even. You can see Admiral Lord Nelson. Letter, and he has one that says "in the hand of Admiral Nelson," which means I don't know if Admiral Nelson wrote something in this book or if he just had the original near him and he could try and copy the style.
We would have to find a sample of Lord Nelson's handwriting, compare it to what Spratt's is, and if there's a distinct difference, then follow up and see if it was close. I mean, there's ways you can identify the 1799.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll find, Imperial Apartments, thanks of Lords of Commons, so lots of these are accounts. There's a lot of accounts of battles. So Lord Nelson's principal victories gained, 1797, the Bay of Biscay. And it's nice that it has, a lot of times it'll show the ship that was sank, but also how many people were on it, how many lives were lost, an attempt to bring... these battles, and he talks about Napoleon a fair bit too. So I'll find a couple interesting entries for us to look at. Yeah, and I don't believe that was printed. I think that he or someone drew that in the book.
It would appear so. If it's printed, you can usually tell.
I'm just looking at the lights and
finer.
The lights and the darks of the inks, and so there's a lot of really nice drawings in here.
I wonder, Alex, if he did them all himself, or if he had maybe a family member or somebody that was, talented artist, or maybe he was all of that.
Hard to say. I mean, there's enough drawings in here that it would lead me to believe that as he decorated these pages, this seems like a very private sort of book. This seems like this was his journal, his book.
Yeah.
So I don't know if too many people would have had access to this other than him. He probably packed this around all over the place. But yeah, look, British heroes, Lord Wellington, and you look at the years and dates, 1809. I like the little cannons he's put down there. Bird. See, it's kind of amateurish though, like the lion.
Yeah.
But still, nice detail.
Oh yeah, like a little cherub and.
Yeah. Yeah, he put some effort into it.
Well, clearly.
There are some accounts of the 7 Years' War. At this time, he called it the Heroes of the War, 1755 to 63. Of course, a very important series of wars because, of course, the taxations from these wars led to discontent among the colonies, which led to the American Revolution. And he talks about some of the battles. He says, the spirit of the Americans may be a useful example, as our dogs and horses are only English upon English ground, but patriotism, it seems, may be improved by transplanting. They weren't really happy about the fact that they split the colonies, he talks about it being divided, the colonies feeling very divided. I think, in effect, divided one half of the empire from the other. So this is happening right at the time of the American Revolution, of course, from the British perspective. Very interesting. A letter to General Washington, dated Versailles, July 29th, 1782. Sir, it is not in quality of a king, the friend and ally of the United States, though with the knowledge and consent of His Majesty, that I now have the honor to write to your excellency. Now this is a known letter. This isn't the only copy, but this person obviously had, seen the letter, or it was probably published at the time, and he felt he wanted to put a copy of it in here. But this is a memoir, a transcription from the time that this letter was written, and that's pretty interesting. Not every day you get to see a letter to George Washington. 1803. A number of rebels hanged in Dublin for their late rebellious acts. Robert Emmet, the commander-in-chief, was hanged on Tuesday, the 13th of September. On being asked in the usual manner of what he had to say, he addressed the court. And basically from here, this is a pretty famous speech. It's called the Letter from the Dock, I believe is what it's called. But these are the man's last words. So I have a feeling that he was here to record these or to write them down. And it's pretty interesting. He's saying he was not, at this time, that he was being accused of conspiring with France to try and take over Ireland. And they weren't super happy about that. And he was hanged. On this page here we see troops and number of militia in England. This is interesting. Napoleon had his brother Joseph proclaimed King of Spain. The Spaniards proclaimed Ferdinand VII as their king and denounced war against Napoleon and peace with England. What a time to live in. And of course, newspaper clippings. So in personal valor, Captain Oliver, in a letter to a friend, says that the instant's valor in the Battle of Trafalgar were astonishing. He talks about a fellow that jumps off the ship, the Defiant, and runs alongside of the French ship, I'm probably going to butcher that, but L'Agile, the French frigate, which they boarded. He swam across and fought people off all across the way before they had a chance to get there. It was later taken, and of course he became a hero. Now he's got a little clipping from a newspaper from that time too, and he says he continued fighting for 10 minutes, and that let's see, he is recovering. Oh, here it is right there. He is now in the hospital at Gibraltar and in good spirits. That man, of course, was Jack Spratt. I think this is probably about when the book started. November 5th, 1774, Harmer Spratt of Ballybeg. And he's got that nice little Celtic decoration on there too. Ballybeg, yeah. Cure for a cough. What if the cure for a common cold is in here? This whole time it's grind up some mosquitoes and dandelions. We're like, this whole time we thought they were nuisances, and they're the cure for the common cold.
Well, if it's in Ireland, you'd have to take it with some whiskey, I would think.
Or some potatoes. I like that he's changed his name now on this page to not Harmer Spratt of Ballybeg. He's now the Immortal. I guess in a way he is, because we're reading his book now hundreds of years later. And look, this must be when he was starting his house up, because he's wanted a cook and housekeeper. And look at it, they do the S as an F.
Right here.
Yeah, right there. Inquiry to be made at the printers hereof.
Yeah, so, and look in the word also, ALFO.
Yeah, instead of also.
Yeah, so and the date under that is
1772. Harmer Spratt. And I see that I'm not sure what that says. June, maybe?
So I think...
Geez, I wish one of us was smarter.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of interesting that he's got an article in here saying that there is a Back Abbey apparition. So there's talk of a ghost.
This is for ridding me of this troublesome companion. He lent her a summons grounded on a strong faith in Christ, and she obeyed. May his generous soul never see. I can't make that out.
But that's 1730. Is it 1785 or 35?
One of the two. I'm
October 30th. Well, isn't that interesting that, that he kept an article on ghosts? That's probably not something you see every day in a book.
Not today.
No.
I bet you wasn't uncommon then, though.
No, probably. But see, this is what's really neat, is in this miscellany portion, he's talking here, and you can see his quill is dark, so he's just inked it.
Yeah.
And he's writing, to support an expensive war, which was, as we know, the 7 Years' War, in circumstance of absolute necessity, a lottery may be, and then he kind of adds in, be affordable, or...
Maybe.
But essentially what he's talking about is that they needed money to pay for the 7 Years' War, so they taxed the colonies. And he's saying that argument to the colonies, there's the colonies there, of course, America. And while perhaps they are no more, the minister is divided one half of the empire from the other. So this is the beginning of the American Revolution, right here that he's writing about. It's the end of the 7 Years' War. The colonies aren't happy about having to pay all the taxes, and really that's what happened. Yeah, this he's talking about Benjamin Franklin, and he's saying the following is Dr. Franklin's epitaph on himself, which he wrote when he was a printer in the early part of his life, which is inscribed by his own desire on his tombstone. The body of Benjamin Franklin, printer, like the cover of an old book, its contents worn out.
One more and a newer and more beautiful edition.
And there you go, baby.
Corrected and amended.
Funny guy, that Benjamin Franklin. He looked like he had a sense of humor. I was joking about mosquitoes and dandelions, but there actually is a recipe in here for dandelions. To drink the clarified juice of a dandelion. It heals the hunger, cure for consumptions. A drink for wheezing. Well, that's good to know.
Book, and much like the one we're looking at, it was sewn. So if you can see under there.
Now, this is a book that you're working on right now.
Yes.
This is my book.
Yeah.
That's your book.
And this is a book I'm rebinding in Moroccan leather. So you take and you sew it, all the sections, signatures together, and that's this part that's sewing right along there.
Okay.
And this I've added on top because it's going to have raised bands.
Right.
And make it look older. So when we look at this book,
Right.
you see these two tapes here.
Yeah.
They come up like that.
So instead of doing sort of this...
This is a fairly utilitarian, although there is some blind stamping on the front. So those tapes come up and they attach to the boards, and that's how you keep the boards and the spine all in one piece, and then you can cover it in the leather.
Right, okay. And so how old is the book that you're doing there?
Oh, this is the first Canadian edition of The Lost World.
Oh, okay.
By Arthur Conan Doyle. So offhand, 1920s.
Okay. So, and we can tell from this, you were saying that looking at the way that this is bound, this might have been something that was, he purchased a journal, a blank ledger or journal, and started writing in it?
That would be my guess. Because, you need some specific tools and knowledge to sew all of the signatures together. See, that's one signature, there's another signature, and it's the whole stack of signatures makes the text block.
And signature is just like basically like a stack of papers that's all put together, right?
That's correct. And then you sew those together, and then you have a text block. So you can see where it's all been sewn along the spine edges.
Yeah.
I mean, again, this book is hundreds of years old, and it's seen a lot of miles and a lot of wear. So it's not surprising that it's, got some cracks and breaks and a little bit of use. But, all things considered, it's not horrible.
It's still in one piece.
Yeah. So I would think that this is a repair that's been done at some point.
And what did they repair it with?
It looks like, in those days, they most often did use calf leather. This looks like a type of vellum to me.
We kind of noticed that they didn't have staples then, so he used a pin.
Look, yeah, it's just a straight pin.
Like a little forged, handmade kind of straight pin.
Yeah. It's pretty oxidized. I think it's been there for a while.
I would say so. It's just a book so special. Every single page has some amazing piece of history that was happening when this man was alive. Bonaparte, Emperor of France. Bonaparte crowned King of Italy. at Milan. What a time to be alive.
So Alex, I think you should probably wrap this up in a nice piece of felt or soft cotton when you're carrying it around. Don't leave it loose on the front seat of your car anymore.
And in your estimation, I mean, my thoughts are the book is 100% real. But based on what you see, does it look about right?
I would agree with that. Again, I'm not an expert on this time period, but there's nothing about this book that suggests to me that it is not real. And why would you forge a personal diary from that?
Yeah,
that period of time?
1772 or what have you. Yeah, I know. It'd be crazy. It's always good to have a second opinion on these things. I guess what I'm hoping is that... So thank you again very much for having a look at the book and meeting with me this morning, I guess early afternoon. I'm hoping that the book finds the right kind of owner, that either somebody who is, you know, at a university or university collections or library, or it needs to go somewhere to be preserved. I'm not the right person to be owning this book. I'm the right person to have found it. That's where my role ends. Now I got to find the right person to own it and take care of it. But thank you so much for having me by today.
Oh, I really appreciate you bringing this book by. It's fascinating. I've never actually seen a book quite like this one before. You know, a blank journal. I didn't even know they made blank journals back then.
I know it's really cool.
And it's, I mean, what a time this gentleman had in his life. All of the events and people that were in and out of his life that he documented.
Yeah. American Revolution, the Irish Rebellion, the Napoleonic Wars. I mean, he lived through some of the most important times of our history. That's why it's such an important journal. Right. Is that this is a journal of somebody who was educated, had the ability to document it and put it in this format, and now we have to make sure it's preserved for years to come.
Well, I'm confident you'll find the right home for it.
I hope so.
And thank you again for popping by the shop and let me have a look.
Oh, of course, anytime.
Anytime.